Hi, Inge.
Hi Nisha, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks.
I had a quick question for you while we're waiting for the others.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Claudia mentioned that she thought you were also planning to test the social norms diagnostic tool in your project. Is that accurate? I don't think we had that discussion, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, who mentioned that?
Claudia from Oxfam.
No, well, actually, no, we haven't discussed that, but I know that Oxfam is having discussions with the Farmer Income Lab, and this is a new lab that Mars has launched.
Okay.
And I know that they are exploring with Oxfam is an advisory to that lab, and they're working with, so they're having talks with Oxfam, and I'm not always up to date on what they're talking about because
Okay.
it's globally, and I'm really into chocolate, into cocoa,
Yeah.
and they're talking globally, so it might be, but I haven't heard about that.
Okay. No, I don't think she was talking about it from that perspective, but I'll double
Okay.
check.
Yeah. I know they're having talks with Oxfam, that I know, and I told them that we're having talk. I mean, I'm in this group as well, so we
Yeah.
should make sure that we're all aligned.
Sorry. Somebody was calling me on Skype. Hello? Inge, I'm sorry. Somebody was calling me on Skype.
Go ahead. I just connected early, so I wanted to make, because I'm in Belgium now, I wanted to make sure that I'm all connected.
Okay, I'm gonna mute myself. Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi, Kate.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, thank you.
All right. We're still waiting for people to join. I think it'll take them a few minutes after the start time. So if you want to mute yourself and do something while we wait.
Sure, no problem.
All right. Thanks.
Hello?
Hi, Ritu.
Yes. Hi, I'm here.
Great. We have Inge and Kate on the line, just waiting for the others. So hopefully we can get started soon. Hi, Liz.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. This is Nisha. We're just waiting for some more people to join, and we should start soon.
Okay, I'll put myself in mute until then.
Great. Hi, Thalia. We haven't started yet. We're just waiting for Ben to join. I think we have almost everyone.
Hello, this is a test. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Claudia.
Hello?
Claudia, we can hear you. Or I can hear you.
Hello? This is a test. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Claudia.
Me too. I can hear her too.
I can hear you. Great.
Okay.
Sorry. Great. You can hear me. So Ben is joining now.
Okay. And I think we have everyone else except I see Pranati is connected, but not to audio, so I'm not sure what's going on. And I see Gianluca has just joined. Oops. Hi, Gianluca. This is Nisha.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you? We're
Fine. Sorry for the delay. It took a while to go through the Zoom download and etc. etc.
okay. We're just waiting for Ben to join, and we should be getting started in a couple of minutes, hopefully, as soon as he manages to download and set up.
He's just sent me a message saying he's connecting, but it's a bit slow.
Okay.
Not sure why. Yeah.
Hello?
Oh, that's Ben.
Great.
Great.
You can hear me. Fantastic. Hi.
Wonderful. Hi.
Let me just close the windows so that... Oh, thank you.
Okay. We're ready to get started. Welcome, Ben. I know we're short on time because I think, Ben, you have to leave in an hour, exactly.
Or by 2:15, yeah. At the latest, yeah.
Okay. So I'll get started. I'll just ask everybody to do a very quick introduction so that we know who's on the call, and then I'll hand it over to Ben. So I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Nisha Singh, and I'm facilitating this peer learning group. And now I'll just start calling on people. Claudia?
Yes, my name is Claudia Canepa, and I manage Oxfam's Knowledge Hub on Women's Economic Empowerment, and I've been working with Nisha on coordinating this group.
Great. Ritu?
Thanks.
Hi, this is Ritu Sharma. I'm with the International Youth Foundation, and I direct the Global Center for Gender and Youth.
Thanks. Gianluca?
Hi, I'm Gianluca Naldi. I'm Senior Women's Economic Empowerment Advisor in Care International UK, and I'm based in Brazil.
Thanks. Imogen?
Hi, I'm Imogen Davis, working at Oxfam at the moment on our Women's Economic Empowerment and Care Programme, but my substantive role is on our youth programming.
Thanks. Inge?
Hello, my name is Ingrid Jacobs. I'm working for Mars as a gender focal point based in Florida. Did you hear me?
It was a little choppy, so can you repeat that?
Okay, I am Inge Jacobs, working for Mars as a gender focal point. I'm based in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire.
Great, thanks. Kate?
Hi, all. I'm Kate Doyle. I'm a senior program officer working for Promundo, and I'm based in Belgium.
Thanks. Liz?
Hi, my name is Liz Vance. I work with the International Youth Foundation as a senior technical advisor from Mexico.
Thanks. Tanjima?
Hi, I'm Tanjima Ali. I am working with Swiss Contact as an MRM officer, currently based in Kosovo.
Celia?
Hi, I'm Thalia Kidder. I'm the Senior Advisor on Women's Economic Rights for Oxfam GB. And with Oxfam, I work on the Women's Empowerment and Care program, including in Zimbabwe and Philippines and Uganda.
Great, thanks. And now I'll turn it over to our guest, Ben, if you wouldn't mind just doing a quick introduction.
Sure. So my name is Ben Cislaghi, and I work at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, particularly at the Gender Violence and Health Centre, where we mostly look at what are the factors sustaining violence in low and mid-income countries, particularly violence against women, although not limited to that, although our work is not limited to that. And I, in particular, work at how social norms, what social norms are, which is already in itself a big endeavor, and how they influence violence and how they intersect with other factors in a way, creating dynamics that result in, that essentially sustain cycles of violence, and how working on social norms can facilitate reduction in the prevalence of the experience of violence.
Great, thanks, Ben. So everyone, we invited Ben to speak with us today. I've shared the agenda, so he's going to present a little bit about the conceptual understanding of social norms in the economy, and then a discussion around change at scale and pathways to change at scale. So Ben, do you want to use a presentation?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, you should be able to share your screen.
Okay, let me try that. Share screen. Let's start one.
Yeah.
Are you seeing what I see? Well,
yes.
I don't know what you're seeing, but okay.
Yeah, we see your desktop.
Oh, fantastic. And if I put this full screen, do you now see the... Oh, wait, swap displays. Do you now see, yeah, do you see the PowerPoint?
Yes, I do. Yeah, we do. I do. Does everybody else see it?
Yeah, we do. I do.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
So,
I do too.
okay, so...
1 second before we get started, Ben.
Sure.
Everybody else, if you could mute yourselves, that would be wonderful while Ben is talking, and then we'll have a Q&A session after this first part, and then go into the second part. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Ben.
Yes. So let me see. I guess it's not. It's always difficult to try and to try and meet the needs of a team when you don't know the team. So I've done my best to try and put on this into this presentation key concepts on social norms at different levels of complexity, and trying to address a variety of outcomes. But you tell me. Well, I hope that I've done a good job. I know there will be some question Q&A time after this. So I guess one of the simplest way of defining what social norms are is by understanding them as the rules that define what is normal in a group. So those rules that group members share when they interact, so that sometimes these rules are rules of conformity, and some other times, and as they are rules of conformity, they require conformity among all members, so that some might need to make an effort more than others to conform. And this is my favorite norms picture ever. I don't even know where I found it. But so if we had to, so that's really that's possibly one of the few things that all the different theorists who work on social norms would agree upon. There are many streams of social norms, and there are many categorizations. One that I came up with a few months ago, and actually I'm now evolving, but is this three partition of the streams of social norms. But it doesn't really matter much, because I will be focusing today on the last stream of thought that particularly defines social norms as people's beliefs about what others do and what others approve and disapprove of. There is some background noise that I'm not sure where it comes from. But, oh, thank you. So I'm just saying this so that you bear in mind that moral psychology, behavioral economics, game theory, moral philosophy, evolutionary psychology, organizational science, health science, and so on and so forth, they all have their take on social norms, and that these understandings are somewhat different and sometimes contradictory. And I don't marry any particular discipline. I think that what the goal is, as practitioners in the field, what our goal should be is to pick a mix so that we can actually achieve change in the ground. But I did say that I will be talking particularly about this third stream of thought that identifies social norms as beliefs. So again, social norms are not is not the actual behavior that people enact in a society. That would be a function of the norm. Social norms is not the sum of the individual attitudes, and we will see this in more detail in a couple of slides. They are rather what each member of the group or society believes others do, and what each member of that group or society believes others approve and disapprove of. And in terms of terminology, the first set of beliefs has been defined as descriptive norms, while the second type of beliefs has been before called in the literature injunctive norms. And terminologies vary, and some people like Vicchieri and some more game theoretical thinkers define the first set empirical expectation and the second set normative expectation. Some people believe that you need both for it to be social norms, while others say that these are two different sets of norms. So once again, one of the most important things that lessons that you can take home today is the difference between a norms and a personal attitude. So this is actually a true story, even these are not the true pictures. This was a friend of mine's daughter who wanted to go dressed like a vampire. Well, this is one of the kids, but she wanted to dress like a vampire to a friend's wedding, actually a cousin's wedding. But because of what people would have thought about that, this little girl had to conform with the norm of getting dressed as a little maid of honor. So what I'm trying to say with this slide is that there is a critical difference between personal attitudes and social norms. And if you ignore that difference, you might be measuring the wrong thing. And actually, you might be implementing an intervention that focuses on personal attitudes individually, but doesn't really give space to the public reconsideration of the group's attitudes in a way that challenges what people think other people approve and disapprove of. And that is quite critical, and leads me to say a couple of words about two ways in which social norms can be misleading, right? So on the one hand, if the first type of social norms is one person's belief about what other people do, so in this little picture, this stickman thinks that almost everyone does red, well, that might be a false belief, right? And it might be instead the case that most people do blue and just a few people do red. But the few people who do red, they are the ones who are visible to our stickman, or everyone might be saying that they do red, and this is why the stickman believes that everyone does red. So this misperception is one of the places where work on social norms started in the 80s. And particularly when they were tackling alcohol consumption in campus. And what they had found is that students believed that every other student would get drunk on a Saturday night, while instead it was just a small percentage of students who did that. And they started implementing interventions to correct these misperceptions. So now we know that changing social norms require more than correcting misperceptions, but this is just one way in which social norms can affect behavior. The other way in which misperception can be important relates to the second type of beliefs that I mentioned, my belief of what others approve and disapprove of. And that in the literature has been defined in many ways, one of which by Miller and Prentice in the end of the 80s, I seem to recall, as pluralistic ignorance. That is a complex term, but essentially means what's there in the picture. So all these members of this very gender segregated board of directors, they're all against a particular proposal being made, but they don't see what people really would want to do. They only see people's masks. That is what people say to approve. So you might have experienced this when you have a friend and you go to the cinema, and then after you went to the cinema, you realize that neither wanted to go to the cinema, and you've just done it because you wanted to make her happy, and she's just done it because she wanted to make you happy. So that's the kind of things kind of ways in which misperception can affect behavior. Now, work on social norms tend to, I don't know if you see my pointer, I assume so, tend to over-focus on this case over here, which is when the attitude is helpful. That is, I don't know, I don't want to marry off my daughter when she's 12, and the norm instead is harmful, but everyone else wants me to do it, and everyone else does it, so there you go. So I marry my daughter, so I marry my daughter off when she's 12, so the outcome is harmful. If this was the case, norms intervention would be very simple. Unfortunately, sometimes the norm actually, the norm is, and the attitude is the product of the norm, so that you are in very interlinked, so that people are socialized as children into individually wanting what the norm is. So in other ways, the attitude and the norm can be also aligned, or both in negative and in positive terms. But just to say, it's not always this situation. So there is a lot of evidence that social norms affect a wide range of health-related behaviors. Most evidence, however, comes from high-income countries, and there you have hand washing, physical exercise, eating patterns, harmful use of alcohol, substance abuse. Or we do have some evidence in low and mid-income countries, emerging from low and mid-income countries, most of which does come from female genital cutting, and I will critique that evidence in a second. But we also know that norms play a role in child marriage, and this is something that's really the people coming from social theory and gender theory have been said for decades, and that this new take on social norms that emerged on social psychology is now adding to. We also have good evidence on adolescent sexual and reproductive health and rights, on IPV, and some on open defecation. So when it comes to the economy and the market, and I don't know if that's exactly what you're working on, but anyway, one idea is that social norms emerged in the economy to facilitate strategy for the exchange of goods. So this is an evolutionary take on social norms. So essentially, you put people in a box and you shake the box until evolution shakes this box until an equilibrium is found, and that equilibrium is crystallized on social norms. So essentially, I'm seeing you once every 3 months, and you may change, and you're the seller and I'm the buyer. Knowing what social norms exist out there will give me the confidence that I can exchange goods with you. And of course, there is a key difference between small bounded society and open and high density societies. The difference being that in small bounded society, norms around the economy are very, and more generally, I'd say norms in general are very binding, because the same people that you do business with might be your friends, might be the people that you'll be marrying one day, might be your family members. So essentially, there are less and smaller groups. And if you break the trust of one person, you are losing many interactions. While in the cosmopolitan, urbanized context, we have many more opportunities, and the person who sells us the bread is not the person who we work with, and it's not the person who's going to marry our son or daughter, and so on and so forth. So the trust equilibrium, the influence of social norms is a bit looser. So why do people comply with social norms? That's a great question, because what you will find is that as people put themselves in a map, as scholars put themselves in a map, they tend to say that there's only one reason and we got it right and everyone else got it wrong. I'm more comfortable traveling across places in the map, so I don't think that there is one single reason by which people comply with social norms, and I list here the most important ones. The first one was being called informational influence, and this is kind of the game theory stuff. When people say, okay, look, some behaviors are coordinated, and we need to know what others are doing so that we can achieve a collective outcome. So the market system is an example. I need to know how you sell, and you need to know how I buy and what the rules are, because we both want to make a profit out of this interaction. The driving is the most classic example. So in a chaotic situation, nobody's moving, and instead we need to resolve this situation in a way in which everyone is benefiting from it. So informational influence and female genital cutting is an example of driving, has been found to be an example of driving in certain communities, where the collective outcome being we want to marry our daughters, and we need to signal, actually we are almost competing for purity of our daughters, and those who don't cut their daughters, they won't be considered pure and not marriageable. This is one of the explanations, by the way, attached to FGC. Is not the only one. There's a great variety across places and settings around the world. But this is the ones that has been used in social norms. Is the explanation given by social norms theory. Another reason why people comply with social norms is normative influence. So different from informational influence, normative influence is the influence that is exerted by the anticipation of the consequences for me complying or not complying with the norm. So here's two kind ladies who, in my interpretation of the picture, are gossiping about someone, and here this man appeared to be very interested. So essentially, when we comply with the norm, we incur in positive social consequences or positive social sanctions, if you like to use the terminology. This can be I become an elder, or I become an adult, right? So I did an ethnographic PhD, and when I was welcomed in my village, I was already 30 by the time I started my PhD, and the old men in the village, they said, it's okay, but you will be sitting with the children because you don't have children yourself, and you're not married. So here's a negative sanctioning for not complying with the norm, being that men of my age should already be married, and the positive one would have been sitting with the older men. But other negative sanction might be being gossiped about, or even being threatened to death, or even being killed. And important is not the actual sanctioning, is the anticipation of the sanctions. So a third reason why people comply with social norms is because these norms are ingrained in a set of instructions and informations, and in the understream notions that are communicated as children grow up. And in other terms, one reason for compliance, and most often for compliance that is not in the cognitive spectrum, so almost invisible compliance that people undertake without being aware of the fact that they're complying with certain norms, without being aware that a norm is in place, is because people are naturalized, are socialized into believing that boys, for instance, fix things and girls need things fixed. And this is an illustrate. And there's plenty of examples. I'm sure if you think back, I remember when I was a child, the ads for boys were cars, and the ads for girls were cooking toys, and so on and so forth. A fourth and second last reason that I like to mention when I say why people comply with norms is the identity, right? Either personal or social identity. And this is something that has been in the, is my computer telling me that I need to take a break? Yeah. So either personal identity, so I am what I do. And I comply with these norms because these are the actions, these are the set of actions that have brought me here where I am, and they build the person that I am today. So individual identity, but also group identity. And here's an example: what is to be a goth, right? And that means that you wear black mascara on your eyelashes, that you apply white heat to the face. But you may have norms around academics, and or you might have norms in a particular ethnic group. So like, once again, the village where I lived, some of the norms, some of the behaviors they enacted, well, what the people in this village said, they said, well, you know, we are Fula, and the Fula are this and that. So the desire to be recognized as members of an ethnic group was very much driving compliance with what they believed were shared norms across the group. And finally, the last reason for compliance is something that is very often not mentioned in the social psychologist and game theoretical approach to social norms, but it is very present in the anthropology, in the social theory, and the gender theory, is that norms are imposed through power. And well, here's Jewish children in a Nazi classroom doing the Nazi salutation, but a very good example of that also is the Jim Crow norms. So you had the apartheid laws, but you also had a system of norms that wasn't exactly codified into the apartheid laws, but that people followed and enforced as part of the apartheid. Okay, so one question, and then I'm going towards the end. One question is, do norms always exert the same influence? And this is important because people tend to talk about social norms as being on and off switches. So either the behavior is all under the influence of the norm or is not at all. And something that Laurie and myself came up with is a spectrum of normative influence, just to as a model of the different ways in which norms can influence behavior. And yes, you have sometimes norms define what is obligatory. So particularly when I want to achieve a certain outcome, I do need to comply with the rules of the game, right? And so in that case, even if my personal attitude, and only if, is contrary to the norm, if I want to achieve that outcome, I cannot just follow my personal attitude. But sometimes norms define what is appropriate. So if you take the case of an adolescent girl who wants to impress her friends don't really care what she does, but she needs to comply with their behavior. So maybe she will anticipate the sexual debut to impress her friends. The difference is that in the first case, if I drive on the left side of the road, everyone, and the other drive on the right side, everyone will stop and come after me and say, what the hell are you doing? In this case, if I want to impress my friends, they will never come to me and say, well, you haven't done this or that. It will be more me pushing for their approval. Norms also define what's allowed or tolerated. So take sexual harassment in the street as an example, right? And then they also define what is possible. And I can come back to this later. But essentially, the strength of the influence decreases. So another important lessons that we learned is that sometimes norms apply within a reference group, and I made the example of an adolescent anticipating the age of sexual debut, but sometimes they just apply out there in the society. So when we cross the road or when we are in the street, even if we get good news, we don't do the monkey dance, right? Just because we had a great news, as we will do in our bedroom. We still think about the people around us. So this is a critical difference. This is more prevalent in the social norms, behavior, economy stuff, and here is more, and this is where the gender theory is more aware of. The other important thing is that sometimes norms influence behavior in a direct way, and this is the case of FGC. So people cut their daughters where a norm is in place because there is a specific norm around FGC. But sometimes there are bundles or system of norms that interact in sustaining a given behavior. So in the case of intimate partner violence, what we found in a recent paper, and I think I presented on that a couple of weeks ago, and some of you might have been in that presentation, is that there was a system of norms around family honor and privacy, around the tolerance of violence, that women are supposed to tolerate violence, that sustain IPV. So there was no direct norm, there was a bundle of norm. My very last slide is about integrating norms in a wider framework for intervention. So this is what we call the flower framework, and is in a way an evolution of the ecological framework. It evolves, it pushes forward the ecological framework in that it pushes practitioners to think particularly at what happens at the intersection between the material, structural, individual, and social factors. An intersection, for instance, here at the intersection between material and social factors being the accessibility of a service. So it's not just about creating the service, it's not just about making the service materially available, it's about understanding the set of norms and beliefs that are keeping women from accessing that service. And we kind of argue that social norms exert influence precisely and mostly at the intersections, which is where, by the way, change has the greatest potential to happen, and where investments in this hypothesis would generate the greater outcomes in terms of behavioral change. So these were initial reflections. I know that we have an opportunity for questions, and I know it's a lot to take in, but that was us to get. That's what I thought to put in the presentation to get us started.
Thanks, Ben. Okay. If you have questions, you can unmute yourselves and maybe just identify yourself before you direct your question towards Ben, or if you would rather type it out, that's fine too. I think we're going to take about 10 minutes to answer as many questions as we can before we move on to the next part. So who wants to get us started? And be sure to unmute yourself.
Hello?
Yeah, hi, Tanjima.
Hi, Ben. Thank you for the great presentation. The only thing I was wondering is the flower diagram, where you have really well put out all these different functions. But I was wondering that even in MSD, we always look for behavioral change. But when we talk about gender, is that an additional lens or an additional level that we have to look into? Or is it still the same intersections that you're referring?
Okay, thank you. That's actually a very good question. Actually, what I could do is potentially I could just keep this up. So I guess in this framework where we put gender is right in the middle, and we think that gender, we have actually, well, we think that there are 4 critical components to gender. There is identity, there is norms, there is schemas, there is at the cognitive level, and there is relations. And to us, gender is, as power, is at the very center. So it's at the intersection across all these different factors, because they both play a role in influencing these factors, but they also, power and gender, they also are created by the specific way in which people make use of, I mean, by the different ways in which social, individual, structural, and material factors shape the relational reality in which people live. So it's not just, so you can think of policies, they are in a way contributing to gender disparity or inequalities, and it's because those gender inequalities exist that potentially through individual beliefs they contribute to shaping unequal gender policies.
Can I have a question? This is Inge. I'm working with Mars in Côte d'Ivoire with cocoa farmers. Always on this flower framework of behavior change. I think it's really, really interesting because it really shows the different dimensions. And I just was wondering about your, I'd like to hear your opinion on my next question, is that, you know, at Mars, we want to have impact on the livelihoods of the farmers and we want to bring about change, but it's so overwhelming sometimes because you see there's all these different aspects that things have to change, and it's not only the social norms, it's also at the structural level, you know, it's also at the material level, the infrastructure in the communities. What's your, you know, where to start? And this is my biggest question, my $1 million question. I'm always a bit like, okay, where do we start? And I think the social norms are key, but it's not the only aspect where we should work on. So how can I, you know, convince the people at Mars and the leadership on where we should start? I'm looking for answers and I haven't found them yet, and I'm sure many others have the same question, right? I was wondering if maybe you could, you know, share your opinion on this or have a view on this.
Thank you. I actually worked in Côte d'Ivoire in the cocoa plantations.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, in Soubré, in the region of Soubré.
Yeah, that's where I'm working. Maybe we should exchange some more after the call.
Sure,
Very interesting.
Very happy to do that.
Cool.
I think I'm very glad that you're raising this point. That's exactly why we have created this framework to say you can't just look for a silver bullet, right? You can't just say, well, social norms are going to change it all, because I mean, social norms embody material conditions are critical, and the money conditions. And I think there is no one answer to my experience to where do you start. I mean, I would start with that diagnosis. So one way in which this particular framework can help is, and we used it in this way before with Save the Children and with other NGOs, but ActionAid. But the way we used it is by using it to diagnose first the different factors that are in the pure domains, if you like, and then to start this critical discussion on what's at the different intersections, and then there is an accompanying table to this where you can prioritize across. I can send you the paper, is under review, that is actually for essentially you identify priorities across all these different factors, and then the next step is who are you working with. And something that we're not very good at doing in the world of international development is collaboration. So you have a community where you have Oxfam and you have ActionAid, and you have Save the Children, and you have the government, and there is no integrated action. And it's not necessarily the fault of the actors, it's the reality of the country and the structural system that we will need to change in the next 50 years. Yeah,
thanks. I'll follow up with you on this, Ben, because I think there's some interesting things there. Thanks.
Thanks, Inge. Thalia, I see you have a couple of questions you typed in. Do you want to just follow up?
Yes. Hi, Ben.
Hi.
Nice to hear again, and it's very good to hear both the slides that you already presented to the Oxfam group and some new ones. So I'm talking about the process of prioritization that's on the intersection on the map here, specifically on social norms. What is the assessment process or the diagnostic process or principles around that process to come up with knowing which norms are the ones that are the best opportunities for change in norms and behaviors? Also, so the other prioritization part, I think, is not only identifying the norm that may leverage the most change or have the most opportunity for change, but also the question of delivery mechanisms. So once you know what that is, how do you know whether this is something that is best dealt with in public communications or workshops or other types of delivery?
Yeah, it's a very insightful question as well. So in terms of, we have this thing called the funnel of norms, diagnosis and measurement, and something that we argue in here My computer is freaking out that I'm not taking breaks. It keeps showing me these little things. But so something that we argue as part of, and I can send you this. But something that we argue is actually is better seeing in the previous slide, is that according to the amount of evidence that you have on social norms, you should use certain tools or others. Something that we've seen is that a lot of NGOs start from here, from the measurement, right? And sometimes I get sent questionnaires saying, okay, well, can you look at this questionnaire? And are these good norms question? And I have no idea. I have no idea because the first step is really to get in and understand if a given behavior is under the influence of social norms, and it might as well not be. Or, and if it is under the influence of social norms, then under the influence of which, Michael, I'm on a call. Under the influence of which norms in particular. And then the second step that we call for is when you do have some idea of whether this behavior is under the influence of norms, then we call for investigation. That is, you go in and you create vignettes that are very, very similar, that particularly pointing to the norm behavior intersection that you found, and you investigate their power, and then you go in measurement. And I mean, I know that's a preliminary response to your question, of course, but we can see this more. And then in answering your question, okay, then once we have understood how the system of norms work, how do we plan an intervention? I think I have two things to say about that. First of all, it's very messy, and I think it varies a lot by context, but something that I do believe is a bit true, is that, and actually there is some evidence on that, is that there are two different types of norms, and I think there is actually a spectrum of norms, and then at the two extremities of the spectrum you have the norms that apply within a specific group of people, so norms that are shared by people who live in a village, or by the adolescent friends who go to school together, or whatever, people who go on the market together, and then you have norms that apply out there in the open. And my understanding from the literature that I've seen so far, even though that's something that we need to test, is that the more the norms are buying people in a group, so that I am particularly responsible, I'm particularly thinking about you and you in complying with what I believe you and you approve, then community group dialogues and discussion on the nature of the behavior and the harm related to it are most effective. When instead norms are out there in the open and I get on the street and I behave in a certain way without knowing who these people around me are, then community campaign and policies might be more effective. And of course, the problem is you have norms that intersect the two. So what you see in Rwanda, and you might have heard this before, is that, yes, norms are changing at the structural level. So is one of the few countries where you have more female MPs than male MPs. But then you have ministers who go back home, and after they've taken all these important decisions, there was an interview to one of the ministers, actually. She goes back home and she needs to prepare food and massage her husband's feet because she's a woman, right? So it also gets to what's the best intervention so that we target norms in an integrated fashion, not just out there in the open, but in a way that leaks at the different levels of people's lives. I'm not sure that answers your question, but it's a try.
Thanks, Ben. We'll take one more question, I think, on this before we move to the next part. I'm trying to also keep track of the time. So if there's one final question before we move into the discussion and change at scale.
Just one remark. This is Anam. Ben, I don't know, because I'm joining in late, I don't know if you shared the matrix on the strength and influence of norms, because that might help shed light on this question of prioritization.
I haven't, actually. but I can do it. Let me see.
Just very quickly, I thought that was really relevant and interesting and might
So
answer or point to.
So what Anam is this what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Do you want me to talk to this, or do you have any particular point that you want to make on it? Do you want me to?
No, I thought.
Okay.
I thought this was on norms, but I guess.
Yeah. Well, this says essentially I think this is what you're referring to, and it is on norms, right? So this says there are different. So this is our hypothesis, and it's the hypothesis of normative spectrum, as we call it, the theory of normative spectrum, whatever. But essentially, it's a hypothesis that says not all norms have the same strength on the practice, and the more practices are interdependent, like in the driving examples, more detectable, more likely to result in sanctions and or in stronger sanctions, and under the direct influence. So as in the case of FGC, the stronger the influence that norms would have on that particular practice. And the more practices are independent, so I don't really need to coordinate with others, less detectable, so others won't know what I'm doing, under weaker sanctions and under the influence of indirect norms, so bundles of norms, the weaker the influence of the norm over the practice will be. And this is so far a hypothesis, and that's something that we'd like to test empirically. And we believe that that's particularly relevant to the violence field. And actually, because something that I have told the other day is that even when norms never have a negligible influence. I mean, even when the influence of norms is minor, you still want to address it, because the risk is that you have all this traffic, you have turned all your lights green. That is, you have increased people's aspirations, put the services in place, change the laws and policies, improve economic conditions, and it might as well be that some harmful norms are lingering, and what you want to do is really to try and address all the different factors that are on any frameworks you have, or as for instance on the dynamic framework. Is this what you wanted, Anam?
Yeah, it just made me think of how maybe this sort of analysis can help us then identify which norms are the best ones, or the ones that we should focus on and best opportunities for change, the ones that have the strongest influence, and are held by stronger sanctions. I'm just thinking out loud.
Well, something that we found recently in India is that, which is interesting as well, is that normative interventions seem to be particularly effective when you target the people who are on the edge of changing. So instead of, and I'm not saying this is an absolute truth, but what's interesting is that, and that's something that we need more evidence for, but the preliminary evidence suggests that instead of targeting the most entrenched and the most traditional and conservative, if you work with those who, yes, are still complying with the harmful practice, but like women don't leave the household, but are ready to change, then that will facilitate, and then you give exposure and visibility, and you have them reach out to others and motivate them. And I'll speak a little bit to that, and I've spoken to that when I was there with you guys. But that can help achieve a quicker normative change, because then the most entrenched do see that others around them are changing as well.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thanks, and thanks, Ben. So I think that last point is a good segue into sort of the second part of our discussion about changing social norms and creating change at scale. So what are some ways we can start thinking about that? So over to you again, Ben.
Thank you. So I hope that I won't disappoint you, but I need to make a disclaimer that I have no idea what actually means. So I'm not sure what at scale means in general, and even less what norms change at scale may mean. But I guess I have this presentation, and I didn't have the time to trim it, so I'll skim through slides. But I guess one question that we need to think about is, so what is that we have looked at the system of norms. What is that we want to do? Do we want to dismantle an old norm, which apparently some scholar and practitioners argue is the most difficult thing to do. So it's quite difficult to have people stop saying "God bless you" after someone sneezes. I mean, that's a silly example, but you get the gist of it. So because you will never know if you have in the front of you someone who's still in the old norm or someone who's in the new norm. Or someone who. So just getting rid of a norm it seems to be the most difficult thing. Slightly less difficult seems to change the old norm into a positive one. This is the Swedish example that is super famous from the 60s, 70s. You might know about this already. That's when all the Swedish people started driving on the right side of the road, because essentially all the countries around them were driving on. I mean, I'm simplifying, but around the right side of on the right side of the road, and that was creating a lot of chaos as people were crossing borders. So essentially, they said from this day on at 4 p.m. everyone switch side of the road. Or we can create a new norm where there was no norm before. We can create a new norm so that where there was no norm before, that you're expected to vaccinate your children, and this behavior wasn't really normatized. We create a new norm, and in which case the measurement terms will be helpful to measure norms based on a deadline, even if you think that there are norms associated with this particular behavior, because you do want to create a new norm. I said about that. So the key thing really, if you had to say how the norms change in the most simplified way, is that enough people have to see that enough people are changing. This is Jerry Mackey's example. He often uses this picture, and he argues that the civil rights movement was an example of normative change. So the individual attitudes that were against racial exclusion and discrimination were ripe, and that the publicity of the movement broke through the wall of silence around the appropriateness of non-discrimination between people of different skin color, and that resulted in a new norm being adopted, a norm of equality. It's a good case study, and historically I think this was part of what happened, but it's a good model for what we're talking about. Okay, so this is tricky because so on the one hand we have what's called social norms marketing, and the communication companies working in retailer and working for profit really do this very, very well. So they are very good at making us believe what a man is like, what a woman looks like. And one learning that we have from this particular type of interventions that I believe is more appropriate for the norms that are out there in the open and not particularly in a specific group. So one learning that we have in this particular approach to intervention is that messages that underline the extent public messages, so destined to the wider public and not to the practitioners or the policymakers, that underline how common a negative or a harmful action is, might push those who are undecided or those who believe something not to be appropriate to do it, right? So here's an example: 72,000 rapes this month. and there is empirical evidence that this is, so reinforcing negative and harmful descriptive norm is actually, might work against what we're trying to achieve. So I won't go through all these examples, but this is really where things started, as I was mentioning before, in changing descriptive and injunctive norms in university. So challenges these false descriptive beliefs that I mentioned before. And essentially what these people did, this early work on norm did, they said, okay, instead of convincing people that drinking is bad for them, so here alcohol, know your limits, what we need to do is convince them that others around them don't do as much alcohol as they thought. So here 7 of 10 students drink non-alcoholic drinks, blah, blah, blah. And this is potentially one of the most common social norms in campaigns, approaches to campaigns. I'm a bit critical of this approach because because I think it's appropriate for very specific and context-limited settings as university campuses. But it does show some results. And here's one that is more in line with what we do and our interest. 83% of college men respect their partner's wishes about sexual activity. Another interesting example comes from the work of Antanas Mokus. And yes, one of the things he did was, so Mokus, he was the mayor of Bogota, right? A genius. This man really is one of our most underrated geniuses of this century. Now, unfortunately, he's sick, but and he couldn't run for president. He was going to. So he had this problem. The traffic police was very corrupted, and this resulted in a lot of people not respecting the rules of the traffic, and this resulted in a lot of people dying. So what he did, he fired them all, and he replaced them with mimes because he believed people are more afraid of being publicly shamed than paying a fine. Initially 40, then 400. This gave a lot of visibility to what was happening, and so it wasn't just the visibility; it was the discussions that started as part of something very new and very funny, if you like, very visible, very well known, so that people started talking to each other about how this thing about people not respecting the rules of the traffic laws had to stop. So it strengthened the injunctive norms around this being negative. And there is a short video here, but you can find this easy online. And he did a lot of other things, like the Estrellas Negras, the Black Stars, where he marked the spot of a death resulting from traffic accidents. He gave these cards distributed to citizens so that they could say thank you as they were driving, or they had the thumb down, and then so that essentially they would manifest to each other publicly whether they approved or disapproved what they were doing. And here's the decrease in traffic-related death in Bogota. So this is the national. This is Colombia, that goes down naturally, but Bogota has a dramatic fall in 8 years of work. So this wasn't a 1 or 2 year program. Here's an example, but you might know about this as well. These I talked about. Sorry, I'm skimming through this. Oh, well, you probably will know the Ring the Bell campaign already, which is a campaign. They did a lot of videos, and here's the video of this couple, and there is actually many that I could show to you, but this is the video of a couple who hear a case of violence, and so the man goes upstairs and rings the bell with an excuse. He's saying, do you know what time is it, or do you have electricity? Yeah, he asks for the time, and then the man says the time, and then he checks his own clock, so essentially saying, I'm not here for the time, I'm here because I heard you hitting your wife, and this became a nationwide movement to kind of tackle the norm that you're not supposed to intervene in family affairs. And here's a group of men gathered to watch the episodes in Uttar Pradesh. Once again, not just the campaign, but also the discussions about it. These I will skim through it because it's very similar. And here's the other type of interventions, the community work, so the bottom-up work. And the framework for the norm adoption is Jerry Mackey's framework, but they all start from, and this is Kincaid framework, but they all start from the same idea that you have a core group, you facilitate discussion and deliberation of this core group. This core group reaches out to others in ways that are culturally compatible, so it's not you reaching out to others, it's them. And then when you have enough people ready to change, you start the change and you make it public in a way that is coordinated. And some examples include the example from Prevention in Action in South Africa that was designed to reduce gender-based violence, and something they did, they created violence-free zones. And they also, to make it public, they would put stickers on the doors of the houses, the households that committed to be violence-free homes. Here's a small example of one of these pictures. So this was both in the public places and on the doors of the people participating in the program. Another example comes from the Salima campaign. Salima is a word that means integral or bodily complete, and it's a campaign against female genital cutting. And one of the things that they did as part of the work, beyond facilitating community dialogues, they associated this particular color of wax, that is the particular color of fabric, African fabric, to the Salima movement, and then they would wear it everywhere, and they would have so this was actually a mix. They would have TV campaigns, so this was a mix of community dialogue and TV campaigns, and they would have signatures of people committing to abandon female genital cutting. So essentially these are community conversations, and I guess when I look at all these community conversations, really the three steps that are critical for these community conversations to result in change are motivation, deliberation, and action, when you boil it down to the juice. Motivation being the problematization of the current situation, because many, as we were mentioning, many norms are naturalized, become doxa, if you like to use that term and that theory that comes from Bourdieu. But anyway, they become stuff that you don't even see. And if you don't see it, it's not a problem. So problematization that happens through knowledge to help that problematization, deliberation of values that helps people disentangle the value that we have and that people really are usually attached to, like love for children, to the practices, child marriage, as an example. And as these people become motivated, then deliberation around the strategies to achieve the new outcomes that they have envisioned in the previous step, so that these core groups change norms within the group, and then they enact the actions that they have planned in ways that pull other people together. So they might first need to go and talk to key decision makers or influencers in the community, pull them together through their own understanding, sharing ideas, sharing their internal motivations, and then eventually gathering enough people to do public events where those new norms are sealed. And of course, the change in the normative behavior, if you like the word behavior, although I don't particularly think that we only stick to one behavior, but our actions are influenced by a set of situational presses. So every day we behave in different ways, provided granting that there is a certain consistency, but this is just to say that after your intervention, the new norms might achieve a change in behavior, and of course you will have lapses and relapses. And so the question becomes, after your intervention, how do you sustain the normative change so that after potential lapses, this is maintained? So this is just a quick introduction to what helps change social norms. In terms of the scalability of this, I think that I usually have three ways of talking about scale according to whom I talk, but I think that we need to move away from the idea that one working program needs to be brought at scale, right? Sometimes maybe that's not what needs to happen. What needs to happen is bringing the insights to scale. So understanding what works across programs and trying to understand how key factors or key strategies that help people reframe and renegotiate social norms can be brought into new interventions that can be used at scale. So one example is there is this group on media campaigns, and one of the learning lessons that we had on changing norms through the media is that it's not just about the media itself, it's really about the discussions that these media achieve. And I think that, I guess the last thing that I want to say is that there is a very fine line, and it is a dangerous line to walk on, that separates interventions that achieve change from interventions that actually strengthen the norm and entrench people even more into the behavior. So if you take media campaigns, I think those work very well when there is already ferment or buzz, like fertile soil in the place where you want to achieve change for change to happen. Because, once again, this is emerging evidence, so I might be saying the opposite in a couple of years or in 3 years, but there is emerging evidence that suggests that potentially when harmful norms and harmful attitudes are aligned, sending messages that, let me give you an example. So when people believe that it's okay for women to stay at home, and they believe that there is a norm that women should stay at home, just sending media campaigns around how women should not stay at home and go out and work in the public might actually crowd out the information, the injunctive information, and the discussions that follow might increase people's beliefs that they're doing exactly what's right and what's expected, and that these media campaigns really don't get it or are not for them, or are potentially done under the pressure of international organizations, Western international organizations. So I guess a deep understanding of what's going on is required before trying to extend what's working in one setting to the larger regional country. So I guess that's about it. I don't know if this is what you wanted me to touch upon. I hope so.
Thanks, Ben. I think that was really interesting in helping kind of think through the change, strategies. I don't know if you have time for a few questions. I know you had to leave at 2:15.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm going to Tanzania unexpectedly, and I need to retake a yellow fever jab, and it was either today or never, so I really need to go. Okay.
So what I'm going to suggest is thank you for your time, and if we have questions, is it possible for us to follow up with you via email if there's anything specific, because we might continue on for a few minutes here?
I think the best thing will be, yes, absolutely. If you send me an email, then I think the best thing will be for me to have a call with one or two of you. Okay. And then I can respond to those points in real time. I think that usually works better.
Okay.
That's okay with you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks to you for this opportunity. And I'm really proud of the important work that you're doing. And I'm really looking forward to the work on social norms that you guys are going to do. And I'll meditate about this while I get a needle in my body. Oh, I'm scared. I'm scared, very scared. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Ben.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, so with everybody else on the call, what I wanted to suggest, kind of building off of that last presentation from Ben, is maybe, you know, if you want to talk a little bit about your own, you know, there's two parts to the discussion around changing norms. We've been talking about scale, and maybe what do we mean by scale is sort of a question that keeps coming back as we're thinking about these pathways and strategies for changing norms. So I wanted to get some initial ideas from some of you of what comes to your mind when you're talking about change at scale. Any thoughts? You're going to have to unmute yourself if you're speaking, because everybody is muted.
Hello?
Yeah,
This is Gianluca. A possibility that came to my mind, also considering the examples of the presentation, is leveraging marketing campaigns of the private sector. Ben was saying that the private sector is really good in make us believe what they wanted to believe, basically. So this sort of power could be leveraged. Advertising campaigns for some specific products could also be a vehicle to convene positive messages around, for instance, masculinities, new ways for men to behave that are more conducive to women's economic empowerment, and also new ways for women to behave in a positive manner. I think there are already some examples around. I remember something, I think, from Diageo, if I remember well. Mm-hmm. So yeah, this is a possibility that came to my mind as a first thought.
Okay, so those are sort of specific strategies that you're saying we can already look at on the advocacy side. Any other thoughts?
Nisha, maybe I think the first step before we think about, you know, strategies,
yeah,
we should think about what the question you asked, what is it that we mean by at scale? And I think we have to be modest here and not create expectations that we'll be able to change norms everywhere and at the same time. I think the context is very important to look at. So every context is different, and also the populations that we want to touch are different. You know, if we want to work with the farmers and change the social norms in the rural areas of cocoa farmers, for example, that's going to be very different than if we want to change norms at the level of the consumers of the chocolate, for example. You know, so I really do think that that's the first step that we need to, you know, each one at their level needs to look at, okay, where is it that we want to, what's the context of where we want the norms to change? This diagnostic, you know, there must be some diagnostic tools, and Ben was talking about one, that we can see, okay, what are the norms that should be changed? What's the priority for our work? So I think the context is very important when we look at the scaling. Mm-hmm. And then we have to be clear with ourselves and say, look, we're going to change the norms in this geographical context or population context, but not expect, when we say changing norms at scale, the first thoughts could be like, wow, we're going to change the world. And I don't think we are, because it's just, there's just too much to be done. So just, we have to be careful on that, not to create false expectations.
Yeah, I agree.
That's a thought, right? Just
yeah, in terms of drawing some boundaries around what can influence realistically and how deep that change can be. And I think those are the two sort of dimensions I've been thinking about, is how deep is the change in terms of, how much influence are you able to have, and then, the question of how lasting can it be. Those are dimensions of scale we probably need to really examine, because we're talking often about entrenched norms that have been created over a period of time. So understanding the layers in that. Would anybody else like to add to that discussion? I see something from Thalia. Thalia, do you want to talk about it instead of me reading it?
Yeah, I woke up this morning to the BBC reporting on a proposal from the UK Advertising Standards Agency, or whatever it's called, saying that ads shouldn't promote harmful social norms. And what I feel like was the shift was that it wasn't saying, yeah, we shouldn't have knife violence in an ad, but it was actually saying that what I wrote up, that having a portrayal of it being normal that women clean up and everybody else can make a mess was harmful. So that's new. And I guess what that says to me is that it is possible to think about change at scale by combinations of what Gianluca was just talking about product advertising, and also good government regulation or principles or criteria, or at least having the debate at a government regulation level, as well as in companies about what they intend to be portraying. I guess I would say that there are different levels, I think, of change, and it's very compelling what Ben was saying about how you need to have norms be in flux already, which sounds to me like hundreds and thousands of small conversations, and whether it's religious groups or educational groups, or those things need to be going on. But then when things are in place, to have the mass media promoting something different or affirming that the change is happening, in effect, is quite useful. It creates an enabling environment for all of those hundreds and thousands of conversations that are happening at the local level. So I think many organizations and movements have decided to use soap operas and radio shows and various other things to bring in new ideas and kind of affirm that social change is happening.
Thanks. And that makes me think of, what we're almost talking about is this approach that is incremental. So looking at strategies maybe that, create little changes that then build up, and you create some sort of momentum that will eventually lead to a more lasting or long-term change. Does that sound right?
Yes, it seems to me that we need to do incremental stuff on the ground, and we also can promote that other larger institutions are doing something that perhaps is not as intensive or focused, but as I said, that creates an enabling environment. I mean, even things, if we're talking about men in care roles, if you had the Ministry of Health not do a campaign about men being involved in childcare, but just putting men into the images on the quote-unquote maternal and child health materials, so that kind of things can help at scale.
Yeah. I wanted to ask if the others wanted to add to this conversation. Kate?
I have this point to add, like especially when we are talking about market system development, we are already working with service provider to probably have like, a change for farmers or someone who already bring into the market. 1 second.
Sorry, Tanchika, you cut out.
Yes. And along with that, if you want the gender to add on that, like if we want the training that even women come and attend, there probably is not just a service provider, but someone else that needs to be involved, like within the society or within the community, a community leader or someone who says it's okay for women to attend the training as well. And many times market system development, they do not see this angle, and that is an additional challenge there, because they always feel that it is the like the business incentive, but many times the social norm or the gender norms around it does not have the business. It has to be more community led, like reaching out to more people, telling this is right and wrong and stuff. So there is this additional challenge when we are talking about MSD, and then like targeting norms, and many times the stakeholder we are talking might be different as well. So is there any thoughts around that, or good practices, or something else?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I wonder if Gianluca, or if you have any thoughts on that.
Sorry, I was on mute. I was following up on this train of thoughts, and what I was writing as well on market system interventions. I feel that we can have large-scale impact on the economic side, so on access to economic resources, for instance, access to income, access to training, technical assistance, finance, etc. This will lead to a large-scale change on behaviors, probably when there are other conditions in place. It's difficult for me to imagine an intervention that goes to scale at the same time on the economic side, on the policy side, on the individual behavior changes, on the relationship side. They have different degrees of complexity, different strategies, etc. So probably we need to understand, as also Claudia was saying before, what are the root causes for a certain behavior. We need to understand what are the elements that we can leverage that maybe are already ripe in that specific context. For instance, there might be an appetite for change from young people that can be leveraged. That there are already emerging examples of women and men that are already behaving in a different way, and at that point maybe a change in access and control over economic resources on a large scale can also generate a behavioral change on an equally large scale. If there are not a certain condition already there, for me it's difficult to imagine that happening, at least in the short to the medium term, I think.
Okay, thanks. And does anybody else want to add to this in terms of, what market systems programs typically don't very specifically take into account or target norms? So how can, what needs to be tweaked or in the approaches in terms of ensuring that, the opportunities that are created through an MSD intervention can and do include women? If you're talking, you're probably muted. I don't hear anyone else, so. I think, Tanjima, this is a sort of larger question that we're all trying to answer, and there's a little bit of, I don't know if you had a chance to look at some of the papers that were sent as the pre-reading for this conversation. I think, yeah.
I did look into like some of the papers, but I do agree, like, we are also struggling at the similar level as well. One example is we have this intervention where farmers do not always listen to agronomists, like giving the advice and everything. For the last 2 to 3 years, we're trying to tackle it, and now we see that suddenly it's taking momentum, like beyond the project scope and everything. At the same time, we also try to tackle that more women comes to classroom trainings when agronomists give that. But we don't see that taking the path of scale at all. It is still something the project still pushes and trying to say that come to the training and you will be incentivized in like more than the male farmers would, like giving probably transportation coverage, or even going there and doing it and all these things. So the problem that probably many of us are struggling around is, even though trying to see the problems in different angles and trying to understand what are the social norms and everything around it, but the path to a scale might be very different. So and could also involve other stakeholders, and there are different levels of understanding also from donor management, other stakeholders, and very often it's like, no, the context is different, so it will not happen because there is no business incentive around it. But maybe that needed to tackle more in building awareness and not having with the business incentive. So somehow it's been taken as it's a social program, and MSD is not a social program, so let's not look into that part. How to bridge the gap is something probably we still have to find a middle ground around.
Nisha, I'd like to add something to that. And
sure.
We're starting something with Mars that is not necessarily on social norms. It's more about farmers, adopting certain practices. But I mean, we're looking into something similar where, and social norms are one aspect. Then, you could say to people, look, you have to go to see that coach or that trainer because he will help you do this and that. But I think we need to look a bit into social behavioral sciences as well. And we're wanting to do a barrier analysis in which we will analyze, you can have all the technical solutions that you want, but still people are not doing it. And it's the same with the norms. We know what the norms are, and we're showing people, look, if you do this, it'll really change. It'll have a positive impact on your lives or on that of your children or whoever. And still people are not willing to change or wanting to change. So it's looking into, with the barrier analysis that we want to do, it's more looking into, okay, so what do people perceive are the positive consequences of doing something, or what are the negative consequences, or what's the perceived risk of changing the behavior. And I think this is an interesting angle to look at things as well. We haven't done this yet. I'm kind of researching this right now and looking into everything that has been done. But I do think it's important because you can have, as I said, all the technical solutions and all the theory, but you have to look at what people, the perceptions and the beliefs of people, and what they believe. Maybe they won't do it because, they're too scared or they think it's too risky or whatever. But I think it's an interesting angle to look at as well.
Yeah, and I think that sort of relates to what Ben was talking in his presentation about the, around sanctions and how people
exactly.
How strong is it in terms of the response, whether it's, included in laws or whether it is something that's relatively weak, and that can determine the response. I realize we're over time for this call because I'd said we would do an hour and a half. And I also realized that this is probably, as per our original discussions, it was supposed to be our last call. But what I want to propose is having one more conversation at least, and we can make that the final one, to have a discussion around some of these specific strategies, as well as the question around measurement, because I think that that's a big one that we haven't tackled at all, and it sort of is a good way of tying everything together. Is there anybody who feels like they won't be able to do another call if we propose it? I'll send out a doodle poll in the next 3 weeks if we can agree on a time.
No, for me, it's totally fine to have another call.
Anyone else?
It would be very helpful for me as well.
Okay.
Yeah, it'd be fine for me as well.
Okay.
Could you please include me on the doodle to set the time? This is Liz Vance from the International Youth Foundation.
Absolutely. I will include everybody who is on this call in the invite to set up the next call, and then I might reach out to you individually just ahead of the call to make sure, as I'm developing the agenda for that, so that we can cover the ground we want to and answer some of the questions that you might still have as well. So yeah, we'll do that one final call, and during that time we'll also talk about a little bit about, how do we want to capture these discussions and share them a little bit more broadly, either within your organizations or with the wider community. Anyone has any final comments before we close for today?
Nisha, I'd just like to add, this is Claudia, if you can take a few minutes now to just reflect a bit on what kind, any insights that you gained from this discussion today, and questions that are unanswered that you would like to explore. And if you could send those to Nisha, that would be very helpful for us to ensure that the next call is most useful to you. And also we can pose some of those questions to Ben, and get some, some answers, or at least some insights from him.
Thanks for that, Claudia. Yeah. If you have questions for Ben, please do send them to me. I'd rather we channel it and sort of manage the flow of questions to him. And then I know some of you might want to do an individual call, and that's fine. But it might be helpful for everyone to know what those questions are as well. And I will, I saw a comment about the presentations. I don't have them, but I'm going to ask Ben if he can send it, so I will share that with everyone.
Yeah, and I think it's useful also to know what your, your insights were, because a lot of these, this is social norms theory. A lot of the examples are from other sectors. But if anything resonated, any aha moments, it's useful to share with others, because, it just helps us build on each other's understandings.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for your time. I know we're always rushed on these calls, how much ever time we allocate, but I know that a virtual call can only work for so long. So I will follow up today with the doodle poll about the next call, and then please do send me your questions, and I'll be reaching out to set the agenda. Thanks again. Have a good day.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Thanks, Claudia. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody, for joining.